Melanie, it looks like everybody's in so far.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we'll start because it's 9:30 on the dot. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Conversations with the ASDSA. I'm very pleased to introduce a well-renowned subject matter expert in the skills development landscape, Sylvia Hammond, who is going to engage and present to us on a couple of questions, which I think will generate a lot of chatting and questions this morning, which should keep us going for the duration of the half an hour. The good news is that going forward, Sylvia will hopefully present on more questions that arose from this that will arise from this presentation. So welcome to everybody. The house rules are that your mics are muted for whilst Sylvia does the presentation, but you are welcome to comment in the chat. At certain stages, I will interject. We'll put those questions forward to Sylvia and we'll take it from there. So Sylvia, I just want to do an introduction of Sylvia. Sylvia started in the skills development landscape in round about 2000. Her previous experience prior to that was in human resources and industrial relations. And what became apparent to me in the dry runs leading up to this is that Sylvia is very passionate about skills development, committed to, undoing the fundamental redresses that we have, and you'll hear that as she presents. The slides will be made available to everybody after the session. And Sylvia, over to you.
Thanks, Melanie, and also thank you to you for assisting me in putting this together. Your contribution was very useful to me. Thank you very much. So good morning to everyone. I've just on the title slide just put the questions that Angelique would have distributed. So these are the thoughts on skills development for this morning. The aim of the conversation developed from discussion with Andy. There's two purposes in a way. The one is to revive the memories of all of those skills development practitioners who were there at the start, 1994. There will be some members of ASDSA which I'm hoping will share their memories with us as well. And then there's the young people. Now, coincidentally, when I was preparing the presentation just a few nights ago, a young woman that I have mentored in the past for many years, who's now very, very senior L&D, and certainly could mentor me now, I happened to say to her, I'm preparing this presentation. Where were you in the 1990s? And she said, Sylvia, I was a teenager. And that was a bit of a oops sort of moment, because clearly there'll be a lot of young people who are now ASDSA members and in senior L&D type skills development practitioners and so on, who weren't there at the beginning. And Andy thought it would be quite useful to have that dual sort of purpose for the old hands and for the new young people. Right at the start then, it's quite useful to ask you to put in the chat, if you can, where were you in the 1990s? It was an incredibly exciting time. I was in industrial relations and we were busy changing the entire labor law landscape. So, I wasn't doing the changing, I was trying to do the introduction and persuade management and shop stewards that this was the new way. So what were you? What were you at that time? Where were you? What were you doing? Please put it in the chat for us. Right at the bottom, I've put in a quote, which I think is incredibly useful for South Africa. it's not just the history, it's not just the pastness of the past. The past exists with us now. So just to demonstrate that point, I put together a few of my slides and graphics and so on. I have this whole file that I've collected.
Sorry, before you continue, I just want to give you some comments that that came through. So Mariana Bibby said in 1990 she was 20 and a student, and her road to skills development only started in 2008. So she's really would love to be refreshed since 2008 because it's so long ago. Morena said she was working as admin for the Motor Industry Training Board, which became MERSITA. Vilma Manuel says she was an educator. And then I just put in I was a FMB group training, and we were involved already then with the NQF consultations. Ingrid said she matriculated in 93, varsity up till 98. Renee says managing a farm and educating pre-primary children on farm animals. Felicity started her banking career and was completing her CAIB. And Angelique was still in school, so was Tom Bandler. So yeah, there's your, where was everybody?
That's an incredible range. That's the value of the ASDSA and that range of experiences. Well, that's absolutely wonderful. Thanks, everyone. So, who was the first person who said they want to be refreshed? They started in 2008. That was the very first person, and I forgot the name. I meant to remember it.
Mariana.
Anyway. Oh, okay. So here's the answer to that question, I hope. It's incredibly detailed. So this is a potted sort of revision for you. One of the things I do, as I said, I collect all sorts of slides and graphics, and I've got a whole apartheid file and so on. And some of them are too offensive to even put up, quite frankly. But in the top right-hand corner, we have what I regard as our example of the pastness existing in our present. We've got the people whose surnames are February, April, all of those people whose surnames are the months of the year are slave descendants. We know that because slaves were traditionally given the name of the month in which they were purchased. So these are incredibly important people to us. Not only have they survived, but they've also become heroes in their own right. Just under that, I've put in a little quotation, which I found absolutely fascinating. In 1685, there was an instruction that slaves of mixed parentage, once they reached 25, should be released, and they would become the tradespeople, carpenters, blacksmiths, and so on. And the interesting part about that is when I was reading it, I came across this concept of indenture, because they were put on a contract and they were indentured. So technically they weren't owned by anyone, but the terms of the contract and keeping them bound to the person with whom they were responsible for working actually had the same effect of restricting their movement, their freedom of movement. And in fact, Melanie sent me a very nice, I will definitely look that up further, Melanie, thank you very much. The concept of what happened when it was required to free the slaves and how South Africa responded. And indenturing was one of the responses as well. Anyway, let's move on quickly. I've just put a little graphic there of what South Africa looked like technically, because the concept of apartheid was that people would not be citizens of South Africa, they would be citizens of homelands. And those are all the homelands, the way we were divided up. And I'll explain the relevance of that to skills development. And then obviously the offensive notices, so many of them. And then if you come right to the bottom, I thought we've only just gone past June 16th. This is the student uprising. What's relevant to skills development is the students were objecting to being taught in Afrikaans. That's 76. Another thing that's relevant to us is, for example, in the homelands, Africans were taught in their native language, whatever that was, their original homeland language, and until they got to standard 2, grade 4, and then they just automatically transferred over to English. So you can imagine that's why you often find when you are recruiting people that in their CV they'll say they left at standard 2. The idea that they were going to move from English to Afrikaans was what produced that uprising. So we have the idea of these graphics is to try and demonstrate that in 1994, we had a legacy not only of apartheid, which is people were very focused upon, yes, but there's also hundreds of years of a colonial legacy. Our economy was very much formed by the discovery of gold and diamonds. And you'll see I've got that cover of the book, Crossing Boundaries. Our economy was founded upon cheap labor. People came both from rural to urban mining areas, but also from the surrounding region. So that would be Mozambique, Lesotho, we know very well, some from Namibia, a little bit from Botswana and so on. So, and now what is now Zim? People traveled to the mines and there was an entire setup that brought them there. That song people sing, Stimela, is the song that was sung on the train traveling to the mining area. So what we have is a legacy of exclusion from education, development in the workplace, because in the mining area, it was cheap labor, and African labor was regarded as cheap labor. And there was a specific move by the white artisans and the very, very strong iron and steel union to keep Africans from being trained any further. The logic was that as soon as far more people are trained, the wage rates would go down. And they were absolutely quite right. That's precisely what happened. So we have a very long and very detailed, and that's a very short summary of the detail of our heritage. When we got to 1994, we conducted a census in 1996. And if you ever get the chance and you have time over the weekend to go and find that census, ASDSA, by the way, in the notes at the bottom of all these slides are all the references to all the documents that you might want to find. This 96 census is well worth revisiting, because when I went back to it again, I thought, oh my God, the challenge that we had was so much bigger than people realize. And we think we haven't made that much progress. But when you think that in the 1996 census, nearly 20% of the population had absolutely no schooling. So I'll move to the next slide. And you'll see this is why we set up skills development as we did and how it evolved. You can see that we had an enormous challenge of exclusion from education. So the challenge was how to include by using skills development to get people into employment and into the economy. So the question here is then, were you involved in the consultation? Now, we know quite a few people weren't involved in skills development, but do we have people who were involved in the consultations in the 1990s? And did you participate? Maybe people can also put into the chat so we can get an idea of who was there. Because Melanie's already mentioned already being aware of the NQF and training. And it wasn't that there was no training. There certainly was already training. So who was involved in that changeover in the consultation? I'm not sure if you have anybody in chat yet. Shall I just move on a little bit further, Melanie?
Yeah, the only person who's responded is myself to say yes, obviously at the time when I was at FMB, but I'll keep watching. But-
Okay, great.
so-
I'll
sorry, we've
move.
got Andy. Andy has said he was involved in the creation of qualifications in the insurance sector.
Oh, okay. That's the other thing I found fascinating, is that we have people across all of these sectors, as absolute wealth of history and knowledge that we have in the association. So let me just run through the timeline quickly. So we started in 1994, and there was straight away the white paper on reconstruction. That came there first. Hot on its heels, 1995 is key, because that's when the SAQA Act came in. And that SAQA Act, the purpose was to set up the NQF and to set up the NLRD, which was going to be our recording of everyone's qualifications. Now, I said to Melanie while I was presenting, whenever I think of SAQA, I think of that Elton John song, I'm Still Standing, because SAQA is, I have so much sympathy for that organization. It was set up in 95. It was constantly underfunded. And in the last few years, has been forced to literally halve the people in the organization. And it's still standing. So I don't sing very well, otherwise I'd sing for you. Also in 1995, we had the white paper on education and training. This is a key document. If you get hold of it to read it, you'll see the logic here. The then Minister of Education is responsible for publishing this. And he had a very strong concept that the way we would resolve this very divided society was that we'd put education training together, and we'd remove that barrier of the artisan and the academic and so on. He thought it would be almost what you would call a social engineering of how we would change the society by changing the way we did education and training. And he was Minister of Education. That's very important, because in 97, the Green Paper on Skills Development, the strategy for economic and employment growth, that comes from the Minister of Labour. So we have education and we have labour. And the Minister of Labour changed from Tito Mboweni to Member TC Mdladlana. And he published, in 98, he published the Skills Development Act and the Skills Development Levies Act. Levies were going to fund the whole structure of skills development. And that was under the Department of Labour. That's incredibly important. It lasted, sorry, before I say that, right at the top right hand, I don't know if you will see this, whether you'll pick it up from my camera. Can you see that? Can you see that? If I show you that this is the first national skills development strategy, which Member TC Mdladlana published. And if you just look at the graphics, of the people who there, you know, in the white coat of this fellow down in the corner, and this young woman sitting there with the computer. Now, that was not something that was common. So at the time when it was published in 2000, so he was trying to visually present our new society. That's the Minister of Labour. Then in 2008, 2009, there's a significant change, because the National Qualifications Framework Act, it did reconstitute SAQA, by the way, but it also then formalized 3 quality councils. So we had CHE, they had been there, we had Umalusi, it had been there, but now we have the QCTO that comes in for the occupational qualifications, and that act formalized it. Followed on its heels, 2009, President Zuma very quickly issued 2 proclamations. At the time, people in skills development were saying, oh, I don't know how long this is going to take, it's going to take years, and so on and so forth. But in fact, the president just issued 2 proclamations, 44 and 56, and suddenly we had the Department of Higher Education and Training. So there was one of the young people who came in at 2008, and you came in for the new era. So I'm going to move forward now.
Before you go forward,
Yeah.
Sylvia, just to give you a couple of comments following Andy's. Dion, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Dion Roert was in high school, but their mum, Bia Roert, was also part of the insurance qualification setup. Felicity was involved in writing some of the first NQF unit standards for the banking qualifications. Yeah, and I said, you know, once again, it indicates a very diverse background of people on the platform.
Yes, I have the idea. I have this idea, and the more I listen to those comments, the more I'm convinced that it's an idea worth pursuing, and that is that we should document the variety of contributions and how they came together. Anyway, let's get back to it. So, just to remind you, so remember TCM Jadlana, he's the Minister of Labour, and he starts skills development off. And I love the man, always talked about the skills revolution, always saw it as something important that was going to change society. However, in 2000, when he put together that skills development strategy, the first one, after that, he commented that he was very disappointed by the lack of participation by employers. 1990s was very energetic and people were contributing and doing stuff and making new systems. The new unit standards were going to come in and so on. It was a very exciting time. And it was a very positive, we can do all this. And so it was very disappointing to then suddenly have employers not participating. But there are other layers of exclusion that continues. You know, the pastness of exclusion continues because in skills development levy, there was a discussion about whether everyone should contribute. Internationally, it is true that the more junior, the micro, the small to medium sometimes are excluded, and the system simply looks at the more senior, larger organizations. Initially, we had the idea everyone was going to be included. And then just recently, Morena and I were discussing, but when were they excluded? And they were excluded from 2003, where it was decided to exclude the small ones, that there was too much bureaucracy. Everybody was complaining about too much bureaucracy. And so the small ones were excluded. And you know, now we've got this 500,000 Rand per annum payroll, and you don't pay skills development levy. It started off at lesser amount, at 250 and so on, but 500,000 now. The effect of not participating in the mandatory grants was that you were then excluded from accessing discretionary grants. However, for those who attended CETA this week, you will see on their discretionary grants now, it clearly says levy paying and non-levy paying. For that sector, it's highly relevant because the way that sector works is on subcontracting of the construction work. And so you get lower and lower and lower, and everybody's subcontracting, contracting, and so on. And so the payroll's never going to get 500,000 because everybody deliberately makes sure that they keep their employee numbers down. And if you try to phone up to research, as I did, you can't get people to tell you how many employees they have because there's so much cash labor and casual labor and so on. And they just everybody make sure they are either below 50 or in fact below 5, and then they don't they have to register for the SARS and so on and so forth. Anyway, it's simply patterns of exclusion. And another important problem that came up in RPL, in some of the, in one particular I'm thinking of, implementation of RPL that was funded by the European Union in the early years, it became apparent that the people were not going to be able to get the full qualification. the effect of their low levels of literacy and numeracy excluded them. What they were able to be credited for was individual unit standards, and the report is that they were all highly motivated by that and grateful that they'd achieved something. The point, I think, in this presentation is those were early signs of exclusion and perpetuation of exclusion. But currently, we have challenges and we have warning signals again of what's not working. We have stakeholder withdrawals from participation, especially following COVID. And the ASDSA members have recently identified the learner misbehavior, the professional learners moving from one to the other. I had a very small client that I had persuaded to participate in food industry, food manufacturing, and I thought it'd be really beneficial to them to take on young food tech diploma students. And they were very excited about the concept. So we went to a lot of trouble. They found the one young lady. We did all the documents. We signed all the documents. We submitted everything to the food bev CETA, only be told, sorry, we can't accept this young woman on this graduate internship because she's already had a graduate internship with Rhodes Fruit Farms. Well, I can assure you that the language was blue, and it totally demotivated this very small micro client who could have participated in skills development and just said, no, this is all too much, I'm giving up. And I truly couldn't argue with them. There's also the bureaucracy of implementation, all of those forms, all of having every ID thing renewed every 3 months and so on, and just papers and contracts of 30 pages and so on, which nobody reads and nobody understands. So those are my ideas about warning signals. I'm pretty sure other people present can come up with other problems. One last thing, the magnitude of illiteracy and innumeracy. I told you about the 1996 census. And in case you get incredibly, depressed about our lack of progress, in fact, we have made progress. We have made progress in terms of literacy. We have made some progress. We started off with ABBA, then there was Literacy Plus, and then there was Karihude, and then it became AET, and now you will know the QCTO has produced the foundational learning competence, which I can understand QCTO's concept that we're going to have, because it's necessary to have people with a foundation of literacy and numeracy to be able to move forward. They will either have the FLC or they'll have the various matric type qualifications and so on, so they can demonstrate their literacy and numeracy. However, we still do have a problem. There's no doubt about that. And the important issue in the statistics is that we have that graphic again. African have the highest, followed by colored, followed by Asian, Indian, and in 2020, white population is null in terms of illiteracy. So I've put in the notes, you'll see on the bottom of the slides, I've put in some additional statistics in terms of how we have effectively halved the problem by 2002, and then again we're down to 3%. So we are making progress. There is something to be positive about, but there's just so many other problems. So that leads to the next question of what problems and what issues do you experience currently in terms of trying to participate and implement skills development. Shall I stop for a second, Melanie?
Yes, and because of, in the best interest of time, I mean, we're up to 10 o'clock. I think, let people think about it, and maybe in the next conversation, which you're going to talk to briefly, it's something we can ask people to give comment on. I'm just concerned that it's already 10 o'clock.
Okay, just two sentences. Just before closing, I would just want to share another positive story. I have a brother who's a surveyor in KZN, and he's worked in the rural areas since the old days. And he says when he first went to survey, children would look at him a bit suspiciously. But now, when he goes to survey, all the children come rushing out saying, "Surveyor, surveyor, surveyor." So we have allowed a whole population of young people to see a new career for themselves. The last question is, before we close, would it be beneficial, I'll discuss with Andy, for us to have another presentation which spends a little bit more time on what was different from the old initial skills development implementation to the post 2008, 2009 with QCTO? What was different? And then are we different now? And then one last thing, I picked up a hand. I sort of quickly caught the name. I think it was Mahotla or a name. I didn't catch it very quickly. Somebody raised a hand. I don't know if you can see it.
Sylvia, we are not allowing mics to be unmuted, so.
Okay. Well, if anybody wants to communicate with me, I'm quite happy to receive emails as well.
Thank you
very much
so
for
much.
listening.
No, thank you. I very interesting. And I think you're creating a lot of desire and more passion to look at what we had, look at where we are, where are the gaps. So I think it will stimulate many future conversations, Sylvia. To the audience, thank you so much for attending. To those who want to reach out directly to Sylvia, please feel free to. Everything will be sent through to you later, and I'm sure Sylvia's contacts details are in there as well. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And thanks so much, Sylvia. The comments coming through are really people saying thank you so much. Very interesting. It was amazing. So kudos to you.
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks for helping me put it together. I appreciate that. And we'll be in touch. Okay, thanks everyone. Be safe.
You too. Bye-bye.